determined pose a substantial risk to our community in its continuing efforts to combat the spread of COVID-19. In concurring with their determination, I also find that this meeting is imperative to the continued operation of town government and services which are vital to public safety and confidence during this emergency. As such, this meeting will be conducted without a quorum of this body physically present in the same location. At this time, I also welcome members of the public accessing this meeting remotely. Even though this meeting is being conducted in a unique manner under unusual circumstances, the usual rules of conduct and decorum apply. Let's start the meeting by taking a roll call attendance. When each member states their name, please state whether there is anyone in the room with you during this meeting. Peter Lennon.
Here, and I have the family dog here.
Rob Corson.
I am here and I am alone.
Mark Layton.
Here and I'm alone.
I'm Chris Weeks and I am alone as well. Amanda won't be coming tonight, Mark, so if you get a chance to jot down some minutes, thank you in advance.
Yeah, I'll take it on.
Okay. All right, thanks everyone for coming. Good to see you all. So we've got both the chiefs here tonight. Melissa and Dave are here from the town, Judy from the BRC. We'll start out with just reviewing our minutes from the last meeting, and then we'll jump into the PSC feasibility study. So does anyone have any comments on minutes from the last meeting?
I proposed some additions and clarifications in the minutes, but Melissa has indicated that I misunderstood. So all I have are a bunch of typos, basically. So the comments that I submitted no longer apply. Just some typos to clean up.
Okay, I didn't have any comments. Did anybody else have any suggested changes or anything?
Again, I don't think the rest of us were participated in that, Chris. So it would be you and Peter of the group that was here.
Okay.
So on the bottom of the first page, there's a typo. It's just the third words should be what. And in the on the second page, on the I guess it'd be the paragraph, the first, third paragraph starts with MR, move to program review. In the fifth line from the bottom of the paragraph, where I clarified that I didn't blank to inadvertently back up into a site, the word missing is want, and it just inadvertent, I'm sure. So I would just recommend those two changes and move that we approve the minutes as modified by the typo corrections.
Okay, and I'll second that. And so Mark and Rob, do you guys vote or do you abstain since you weren't here?
I think we abstain, right? Since
Abstain. Yep.
I mean, do you want to table this until you get
enough to? Yeah, we need our quorum. All right, so we'll table it for the next meeting. But yeah, I mean, I recommend Peter's changes, and then we'll accept them from there. And next meeting, Amanda should be back, and we'll approve those and get them entered into the record. Okay, so let's move on to the public safety complex. So we covered a lot of ground in the last meeting. A few things have, like Dave has issued a few documents since the meeting as well to help clarify things. So I thought we would start by talking about those. And Rob and Mark, just to get you guys up to speed, at the last meeting, we kind of went through the whole proposal process just to kind of break it down into layman's terms, what each of those steps we were trying to accomplish. And at the last meeting too, Dave brought up that they would like to do an RFQ versus an RFP, but they would include our proposal in there. Well, not just our proposal, but one that we all agreed on in there as a scope list. So Mark and Rob and Peter, did you guys get a chance to read Dave's RFQ proposal, his draft?
Yeah, I read it.
Yeah,
Me too.
yeah, I have some questions and suggestions.
Yeah, I'd say
But
let's
I'll
start
defer
with
to
the
anybody
RFQ. Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Peter.
I was gonna say, I'll defer to anybody else who wants to go first.
So just, Chris, you had done a crosswalk, kind of a summary of the scope of services with kind of a commentary on the side. Do you want to go, had you already gone through that before with the group?
No, I just issued that today, so we were going to go over that next. I mean, that's going to be part of the RFQ. So
Right. So I just thought this would be a good one to, as a precursor to the RFQ, is to go through those items and just agree on where we are with each of those. And I think that will inform what we do and any comments that may happen as part of the RFQ.
Okay, and even before, that sounds good, Rob. I'll go ahead and do that. But before we even do that, did Mark or Rob, did you guys have any comments on the RFQ path versus RFP?
I had a question on the process, I guess. So when I read the RFQ, I was a little confused. Once you get the qualifications, you're going to select one firm and negotiate, or is that the case? Or are you asking, you're going to go back to get proposals?
Correct. You select a firm based on qualifications, and then you negotiate a fixed scope and fee.
So why wouldn't you not want to just incorporate an RFP into this RFQ process then?
Well, an RFP asks for a cost proposal.
Right.
And I thought we wanted to kind of get the RFQ out there. And the scope that we had envisioned was 150 to 200 is what I thought. And then that was curtailed downward to $100,000. So we have to massage that, but I don't know what that scope is going to be. So the advantage of the qualification space is we put out that scope saying, this is what we think it's going to be. Then we're able to negotiate. And if they come back and say, this is going to be 120, we have the flexibility to adjust that and to, negotiate a price that we want, that we can, that is within our budget.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you're just locked into that one firm, I guess, at that point, right? I mean, it's. I guess that's why I was asking.
No, you're not. You're not locked in. You're
not locked in, but then you've wasted time if you don't go forward with them, because then you're going back out to either out to another process or you go to another firm.
No, I don't think it adds a lot of time. I've done them both ways. I found them both as efficient, but the RFQ process is required with a lot of state and federal. If you get federal money, you got to go through the RFQ process, not the RFP. But that's another story. But anyway,
my suggestion is that it would be combined, an RFQ and RFP process, that you would just ask for a proposal with the qualifications.
That's an RFP.
Yeah, I mean it is. I mean you could right exactly. I mean however it's sometimes they're called an RFQ/P. I mean it's the same thing. You ask for qualifications and proposals, and so where in RFP you could just ask for proposal, right? You don't care about qualifications as much, but you may be pre-qualified. So there's different ways to do it, right? I mean I'm just saying that to me it's if you could get some competitive numbers in the beginning and then negotiate, you may get you maybe have a better negotiating standpoint. That's all. So if a firm knows that they're competing with somebody else with their fees, then they may sharpen the pencils a little bit more. But that's just my opinion.
I've done it both ways. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I agree with Mark, because ultimately I think that the reality is that even though they give you a fee, it's not to say that that's the actual scope. It's not the actual fee, but it's also another starting point for negotiating both the scope and fee. But you're doing it in a way that's competitive, and then you also get an idea about where you are on a budget standpoint. I've
done it either way. I find negotiating. I don't know. I've never found that we can't successfully negotiate a good price either way, but.
Yeah, and one thing I'll say to back up Dave, I mean, Mark, you make a good point, but Dave, one thing to back up your claim is that, it's advantageous for a selected designer to give us a good rate on the feasibility study. It kind of helps make them look better when it comes time to pick the designer for final design services. So they usually don't try to break the bank too badly at that phase.
And also, if you're unable to negotiate a scope and fee, you just go to the next qualified firm and negotiate with them.
I mean, Dave, would you be open to, or have you done this before where you have the RFQ, you go down to 3 finalists and ask those 3 finalists for proposals?
If that was the case, I would probably, I would have to think about that. I haven't done that because then I just asked for an RFP and I asked for cost proposals up front.
But at this point, I mean, if you go send an RFQ, right, you're basically opening it up, you can get, 20, 30 packages, right? And then you can at least go through and say, these are the finalists, whether it's 2 or 3 firms, and then go to them saying, okay, here's the scope and I want your fee. And then I'm going to pick one to negotiate with. So you don't have to, you just be upfront that you still negotiate. It's just that you have some competitiveness going, but just a question.
I have to think about that. I haven't actually ever done it that way specifically.
So the reality is any one of these firms can actually look up online to see what the line item was, voted on and actually was approved. So, so part of that would be is if they know that the 100,000 was approved and they are smart enough to look it up, they can. So hopefully they do that and understand. I just want to make sure that we don't. I think go back to Mark's thing is I don't want to lose time.
That's the other thing I thought of. If you put out an RFP, you put out a scope, and there is no negotiating the scope. You've put that out there. I mean, it gets dicey if you go, oh well, now I'm going to change the scope and I'll award it to this bidder. So it gets a little dicey there. So I thought the scope was still in flux, and we can issue the RFP and then work with the qualified consultant to further define the scope, and everyone agrees to a scope and a negotiated fee. So I saw the advantage with the RFQ that way as well.
Yep, that makes sense. I think that's a good segue. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Judy.
Could I just ask a question?
Sure.
About Rob mentioned not holding up the time frame. Is there some rush here, considering what we already have on the books for debt service?
I think the issue would be is that the sooner that we can identify what the parameters are of this job, this project, the sooner we can plug that into our long-term capital planning. So the reality is that if we wait, we don't have it defined. And I think that's what we're trying to do is get definition. I also want to just hear from Peter on what his thoughts are on the RFQ versus the RFP.
Yeah, thank you. I guess, and let me answer Judy first as a way to respond to that. Judy, we obviously have a concern that if we don't get this project going as soon as possible, and the more time we take with it, the greater the chance there is that some other project is going to get ahead of it in the queue and compete for the money that we believe should be spent on a higher priority project, the Public Safety Center. So I think it's at least from my point of view, time really is of the essence. So that if anything has to compete with anything, it's that the Public Safety Center solution is not threatened by that. Secondly, I guess I'm inclined to go along with the RFQ. I'm not troubled by the lack of a cost proposal yet, because unless we can be firm on what the scope is, and we don't think we're going to continue to define it while this RFQ is out. If we need to take more time to define the scope, but that time is not very long, then sure, let's go with the RFP. But if we're not certain what the scope's going to be, then I would go with the RFQ just to get things underway. I don't think there's anything, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dave, if you issue an RFQ, can you later supersede that with an RFP? And I don't mean much later, but I mean once we settle on the scope.
Sure, I guess you could. Or you could do a hybrid of what Mark said and ask for proposals from the top few firms. But I also see the benefit of an RFQ is I see getting a consultant, and I'm in no rush, Judy, either. I just see getting a consultant could help us define that scope before while negotiating with them, bringing a consultant to the table and understanding that and refining the scope. I think that might be valuable as well.
Judy, I guess we're proceeding under Peter's assumption that the PSC is quite important. How does the BRC view that? Do you feel like there's a first in, first out kind of order to the projects, or?
No, I do not. No, I don't. Not at all. As a matter of fact, we're very concerned about the projects we already have on our books. The debt service we see going forward for a $275,000 house has jumped from under $500 a year per household to over $1,000, and is as the years go on by 2023, it's going to be $1,500 additional for the debt service. Just a $275,000 house, that we're concerned about the debt service going forward, while recognizing the public safety complex building is an important one, or buildings, whatever the resolution is. So certainly I'm in favor of doing all the preliminary work that we can do.
Okay. So
Rob, I don't know if I answered your question, but I guess I'm leaning more toward the RFQ.
No, I understand. No, for me, I just like to know what balancing, obviously, what we have to spend versus what scope of work is. And I think we came up with what we thought was a way to make this a successful project, and a scope of work that represents a successful project. And I'd like to know how much it would cost to do that project as we outlined, and then back into the negotiations. That's how I would like to see it. But I think the issue is that as a group, we can make a decision and move on.
Okay, so is this a good time to review the scope list then? Yeah, let me pull it up.
May I ask? Because I'm confused. I've always treated RFPs. I mean, when you this is the proposal, this is how much it's going to cost. There isn't, then you negotiate with those firms. It's everyone is a competitive and supplies a price, and this is the price for the scope. So that doesn't change. So I'm a little confused. That's not what Dave and my industry says. This is my industry. Do it all the time. We did about 5 proposals in the last 2 months. And guess what? The proposals are again, a way of benchmarking yourself against other firms. It's a way of benchmarking your qualifications versus the cost. And that the actual scope of work is in many cases negotiated as part of the project. Well, I wasn't talking the scope of work. I was talking the price. If the scope stays the same, you negotiate the price and say, even though you gave, so then do you give that option to the other firms?
No, the issue is that they think the reality is that if you change the scope, you're changing the price.
No, I understand that. Okay, I thought you set a set scope, you get 3 prices for that scope, then you can negotiate, you choose a firm, and then you negotiate what the scope, you can renegotiate the scope and the fee.
Correct.
Okay.
But yeah, at least you know at that point, what are you getting? How much of that scope you're going to get for the value, for the amount of money you have. So it's, so if I have $100,000 to spend, and they come in and they say it's, for doing all of this work, it's $125,000. Then it's basically, how do you reduce that scope or pull things out to get you back onto the value?
Now I'll speak on my end is that we do that all the time, Dave, that we communicate that up front. I mean, and part of it is that you further clarify what that scope is. I mean, they're basing it off what you wrote in the RFP or RFQ process. So as we sit down, we're clear with them that once we select the current, we're going to go through this again and negotiate. Sometimes we don't because it makes sense, but a lot of times we'll go in and clarify saying, this is what we meant by this. What did you mean? What did you base your?
No, I understand that.
So I mean, we negotiate all the time. I mean, that's just part of it where,
but it comes with a scope and negotiate. It comes with
we'll talk about the effort that it takes, and we'll just say that that's not, whether you want to say that we're not changing scope, we're clarifying what our intent is in the same scope. So, and or we'll go back and say, that's a little bit higher, and we negotiate and ask for a better price or their best and final. And if the firm wants it, then a lot of times that they'll look at different things. But
so essentially you're selecting on qualifications based, but then you're open to negotiations.
We communicate up front that we're potentially going to negotiate with them, but we don't just pick. We pick based on qualifications, and we're clear on the criteria. It's qualifications, sometimes experience and fee. And then we say that there's a potential that we're going to negotiate. So,
well, as a public body, I know as a public body, we usually put out the slope so everyone's on equal footing. We don't have as much negotiation. We're a public body. We follow purchasing policy and so forth. We don't have as much flexibility or maybe apply as much flexibility as maybe the private sector. So it's a little different than we've done it, but I'm not adverse to,
Yeah, no, I understand that. I mean, you
almost see it as the same exact, we're talking about the same exact thing, just calling it differently.
Yeah, I think so. But I mean, that's why I was surprised that you couldn't just negotiate with one firm and not request a proposal. But I mean, if that's within your purchasing guidelines, then, or your contracting guidelines, that's great. But I mean, just to answer your original question, for what we do is yes, that we negotiate those all the time.
Sorry.
That's all right.
Since we're limited to the $100,000, does that make a difference which process you use?
I don't think so, although the RFQ will give Dave a little more wiggle room when it comes to nailing down the scope and the price. Like if we put a scope out there that was going to exceed $100,000, then that makes it a little more difficult. I think in this case, one of the positives about it, if somebody comes back in and says it's going to take $120,000 to do this, then Dave can say, okay, let's go back and revisit it. What do we need to cut or, use internal resources for, or maybe cut down on the number of options, something like that. Do we want to go through the scope list with commentary now? Okay. So the first part is just the program review. Dave is working with the chiefs currently, and Dave, sounds like you did some site visits and have looked at some other stuff too. So, let me just sum this up really quickly. So the town will put together some initial space requirements, and then we're going to need a designer to double check all of that, against some industry standards, code requirements, and any kind of modern amenities that maybe we overlooked that are being included in a lot of other projects right now. And then this would be a good time to have CPSM review the final program after all that's done. So Dave, do you want to give us an update on what you found so far?
Regarding the space requirements?
Yeah, and some of the facilities stored and things like that.
Yeah, I can give you an overview. I'm not ready to throw out any numbers because frankly, I'm finding it's all over the place. I mean,
Right.
Scarborough did a combined 53,000 square feet police, fire, and EMS. And they're not much, they're 20,000 population. So, they're similar. But I'm seeing it all over the place. So I'm not ready to kind of throw out a number. What I have done is I've done some research. Peter Leonard shared some really good information with me about, police fire stations being built in New England. I got some stuff from the fire chief. I went over to Plastow that recently did their public safety complex, did a tour of that. I went over to Somersworth that has a police station. It's about 10 years old now, but we have a very similar size force and town. So it's a good comparable as far as size and staffing levels. And did a tour of that. So I'm kind of getting an understanding of what the needs are and so forth. And then I got a couple of detailed analyses from the fire chief, who kind of listed all his current needs and his potential needs to accommodate the next, the future. So I'm putting all that together. I haven't, like I said in an email to Chris today, that I'm pulling it all together, and I should have something more definitive in a memo to the Facilities Advisory Committee at the next meeting about kind of what the range of square footage is desired and what's being built and so forth. Just kind of look at the size and initial space requirements.
Okay, sounds good. Apologies, I've got a helicopter going past my porch here. Dave, what are you using in terms of to determine square footage based on our department's sizes? How are you able to determine square footage for, say, bunk rooms, offices, break room, that sort of thing?
Well, just by looking at looking at plans. I've gathered a few plans about them. I mean, I've seen some as small as 7 by 8. I've seen some 12 by 10, I'm kind of looking at all they're all different, what different people do. And I'm still diving into that numbers, but you can see a range of what each, and then you can fit those in, like how big is the office for the chief, the administration, how many offices you need and so forth. And just go kind of do the math and add the hallways and so forth. So that's how I'm figuring out based on, what our existing uses are and, plans that are being built all across New England right now or have been built recently.
So I may assume that a lot of that is really more for your own, it's more for internal information too, just in comparison when we get into really thinking about what the program looks like when we engage somebody to really go through some of that program piece. So part of this is the goal. What's the goal to have at the end of this?
At the end of what? This
is the exercise that you're doing right now, Dave.
Well, there's some, there's folks that are interested in a number, like getting a budget number or an acceptable budget number. And it's really tied to square footage, and getting a range of square footage, would help that. And also, the options of the sites are limited in Exeter. We don't have a multiple of 5-acre parcels to choose from. I analyze GIS all the time. So there's that. There's how much square footage can you fit on the sites that we have, or the viable option. You can go up, and then you go up into multiple stories and so forth.
Right. So just part of this is really kind of to rectify is some of this information or some of the stuff going to be useful for a group that does this all the time? And what are you preparing to give to somebody else that is going to be helpful for them, so that you're not replicating and spending a lot of your time that will actually be done as part of this study? That makes sense?
That's a good question. We're going to get as far as Bob Kelly, suggested at the last meeting was like if you have limited funds, you get as far as you can, and town staff can get some of this legwork done. So that's the goal.
But if you're trying to get to do things like square footage costs and size of the building, I think that
I don't think he's trying to get square footage costs. We're just trying to get square footage period right now. And then we can, based on other projects, we can kind of look at what a square foot cost was on past projects. But
Chris, to what end? What's the goal? Why are we doing?
The goal would be to generate a list of spaces that the chiefs are interested in. And that's what is the starting point for the selected designer to start their programming exercise with.
Right. So that makes, I think just a list is probably appropriate. And then, a lot of, Chris, is a lot of this stuff is generated really ultimately from other requirements. It's going to be
right. Dave may or may not be aware of, how much circulation space, how much
mechanical space, room, support space,
data room, that sort of thing. But at least, we want to make sure that all the chief's requirements are listed as the starting point.
Oh, all those spaces are included. HVAC and, that's mechanical equipment space.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's needed. Any space that's needed.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's bad to have kind of just a rough square foot. I mean, once we go through with the designer with the programming exercise, that could grow or shrink accordingly. But yeah, so I think once we have that list, then that'll be the starting point for the designer to do the programming. Any other comments on part one? Can you guys all see my screen where I have the scope outline up?
Yes.
Just one technical thing. When you say designer, are you talking about the consultant we're going to hire?
Yes.
Okay. Is it assumed that the only people that can do this work are designers?
Versus who else?
Just a generic consultant. Again, I don't have a dog in the fight as far as a specific. It's just that I wonder whether if we start saying designer, that suggests a little bit more down the road than where we really are. And I thought we were going to be pretty careful because we were the ones that recommended that we not go into design, and that this phase was going to be different from design, if you will. So if there's no other word, then that's fine. But if you can substitute something more generic like consultant, then that deals with that possible issue.
I see designer all the time in these documents. I don't think it's an inference that the person is going to be, the final designer or anything. It's pretty standard, Peter.
Okay.
It's pretty standard language on this stuff.
Great. Thanks.
Okay. And so let's move on to the site evaluation. Or any more comments on the program review, or does that all make sense? Okay. Site evaluation. So this one, it looks like, what we discussed in the last meeting is the town is going to do a lot of this, or pretty much this entire phase. And they'll provide the designer with the sites and any other information that we can find to go with those sites.
Correct.
And,
on that, Chris, is that they will provide them the information, and then the evaluation would come out of the site review portion of our RFQ. All right.
Yeah. As far as the scope would go, is site evaluation. It would either come out of it, or we would just say town to supply, list of sites for consideration.
The other comment here would be is that as the items I think that should be included in our scope of work that we're asking them to do is, as they're looking at the sites that they need to evaluate and give us commentary on the infrastructure that's associated with each of the sites, So water, sewer, power, telecom. And I also think that they should be able to do a hardness or a resilience evaluation for each of the sites.
Okay, and what specific items on the hardness resilience would you like to see?
So obviously, as you look at some of the things I just mentioned, water, power, sewer, and telecom, is that if you lose connectivity, what do you do? Is it in a flood zone? What other issues are there from a location standpoint that really have to do with its ability to withstand, events?
I would anticipate that the designer, like the town is going to supply a lot of this, like we should be able to, if we have a limited number of sites, we should be able to point out the infrastructure, the utilities that are going to each of those sites.
Right.
I
But
mean,
it's evaluation, Chris. So an example would be that if you look at the site that's out on Continental Drive, right? One of the Continental Drive, it's a one-way in and a one-way out. So that would be a resilience and an evaluation that you look at the site and say, what are the negatives of that particular site? What's a pro? What's a con? How do you evaluate it and give it that evaluation back to the people who are making decisions about whether that's a better site than another site?
Yeah, I mean, that can definitely be part of the scope is a negotiable portion of the scope. Can we have the designer do a double check on the site evaluation?
Can I ask a question of this? I mean, is this expected, this list is expected on each of the alternatives? I don't think we need an Alta survey for any of them at this point.
No, I think the only thing I said, Dave, was really the infrastructure and the hardness.
Oh, no, I wasn't responding to you. It was a general question. It's a general question about this number 2. Is this, like if I'm reading this in the scope in a proposal that we put out there, am I understanding that you want all this information on the various sites or the preferred alternative, or?
I don't at the feasibility study unless it already exists.
This came from the very original one, right? When we were thinking much more bigger. So I mean, Dave, would it be easier if we crossed out some things that?
I just make it clear on what we want for how many, what options and
right. So in Dave's, in the RFQ portion, it has, this whole section has been eliminated. So my thought is that we would include a site evaluation, and then part of the site evaluation should include infrastructure and hardness. That would be my proposal when we go to the scope of work inside of the RFQ.
Okay, yeah, I wasn't, that scope of services was just a cut and paste in there. I just put it as a filler. It wasn't, and I said that in my memo that, it wasn't a proposal, it was but this is the document. So you would take out little I through, 1 through 6 is basically, you would take out.
1 through 4, right?
And then you can take out the, ASTM and the geotech. The environmental, phase 1 environmental, and the geotech could come out.
Oh, so you're just saying keep 8, just keep the last one for hardness and resilience.
Well, infrastructure, just so you understand what the infrastructure is.
Gotcha.
So if it's underground power or if it's overground, same with telecom. If you only have a single, in other words, if you have a single source. So in telecom, if you only have one source to your building and you lose that one source, that's an issue. So that's one of the things you want to identify as part of your way of evaluating the sites.
But in addition to the resiliency, but it's also the cost, right? I mean, you want to be able to identify.
Yep.
Maybe it's not an issue with these sites, but some of them, to get water or sewer to some of these may be more expensive than another site. So. It should be part of the feasibility study.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to remove 1 to 4 and 6 and 7.
Correct. And I mean, on the town side, Dave, we can still provide them the infrastructure. They can just review it.
Absolutely. Yes. We have that information.
Yeah. All right. So any more comments on site evaluation? No? Okay.
So you're saying by removing those, they will not be in the RFP or RFQ, or that Dave will not be doing those?
Correct.
Which is it?
We wouldn't put it in the scope.
Okay.
Yeah, it won't be in the scope, and it won't be on the town either to do like deed research or a study. I mean, Dave is doing, I would say, kind of a combination of that type of research now. And if something exists, he can include it and use it in there, but he won't be responsible for, environmental assessments or surveys at this stage.
Okay, thank you.
Chris, are you going to update this document? Are you actually going to take those out, or are you going to?
I can. We can update it as we go. So were we okay with step 1 is okay as is? Step 2, I can take those out.
And the reason why I'm asking is because I'm referencing this in my meeting minutes. That's all.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, I'll update this and then distribute
okay.
it.
You're not doing it now. I just for clarity for me on the meeting minutes.
Now I can do it as I go, or else I'll forget what we agreed upon. Okay, so option 3, facility options. This is okay. So this is where we start to evaluate the different options. Dave has already started working on this as well in terms of what the options are that he sees at this point, and we would have a designer come in and go through all of that as well, and then they can also provide their input if they have any other ideas in addition to whatever we came up with. So at this point, this would be the discussion and the thinking about how to come together for the analysis of alternatives. So does anybody have any comments on that?
We would have to do a fair amount of this, right?
Yeah.
Because, I mean, as Dave said in his memo, he just listed some of the options.
Yes.
And didn't list others. So we'll have to ultimately, all of us, come to an agreement as to what these options are.
Agreed. And initially, Peter, we had talked about discussing that more in this meeting. And right now, I guess I switched gears. I really want to get the RFQ, RFP process agreed upon before we get too crazy with options.
Right.
So,
we're going to need to make some word changes in the RFP, RFQ, whatever it is, to not foreclose any options. But I don't think we need to get into specifics of where and that sort of thing.
yeah. Yeah, I guess I foresee that as a future meeting, well, probably the next meeting. Dave, I think you could issue the RFQ without any kind of, we don't need to finalize this list of options and where we might have potential sites, correct? We don't need to.
Well, if you wanted to ask for cost proposals, I would say definitely. But if we're going the route of qualifications based, then I don't think we need to.
Well, as far as cost basis, do you think this would add or how would this affect the costs? Because as we get into the feasibility study, we want them to develop concepts for like the 3 top options.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's like, you do an evaluations alternative. I mean, it's done a lot. Like, they're doing one on the 101 bridge here in Hampton. And you have only, you have a certain amount of options that you evaluate and you dig deep into them. So that's how many options is going to completely affect the price. I mean, if you're evaluating 3 options or you're evaluating 5 and doing the research for 5, it's obviously going to be more expensive than 3. In my opinion, that's, that's my thinking.
Well, Dave, do you already have of the number of parcels that would be amenable to this kind of square footage? Are we talking 3 or 5 or 10?
Well, that's a whole other conversation, but I guess it depends on where and what, what options you're looking at. I mean, we own several parcels now, on a couple on Court Street and one on Continental that are viable candidates. But if you're looking for a new site, I mean, I did an analysis of downtown to try to find something downtown. And I mean, out of the 648 parcels within a half mile of downtown, there's only 20 of them that are over 2 acres, and they're all developed. So there's really not much of an option there. But I guess that would be part of an options discussion.
Right.
There's not a heck of a lot of land opportunity.
Right. And I think that, Dave, part of this is in my experience is at determining the size of the lot needed. Ultimately, maybe not 2 acres, it may be less than 2 acres. And that's part of creating a range of properties that we need to look at. I mean, we currently have a site which is about a 1 acre site. And the question would be, is that, all right, what can we get on a 1 acre site? What can we get on a 1.5 or 1.25? What can we 1.5? What can we get on 2? So we may change what the variable is on what size site we're looking for in the downtown area.
I didn't mean that to say that that's what we need, but I was just basing it off. We already own a 1.18 acre parcel that the current public safety complex is on. So we're not going to, why would we go out and buy a 1.18? It didn't make sense to me. So I was like, well, we're not going to look for another parcel of the same size. And there's none of those in downtown anyway. And I was just like, if you're going to build a new combined facility downtown, just look at 2.
And it goes back to that same comment. If it's a combined facility versus 2 separate facilities, that would be, it's 2 different scenarios. So the reality is that when we begin to evaluate, or when you're looking at the size of sites or lots in the town of Exeter, you may want to start with saying, if it's something, maybe it's not a 2 acre site for a combined, but maybe it's a 1 acre or a little less than a 1 acre site for a single facility in downtown Exeter.
Yeah, there's nothing. I did. There was nothing. There's no availability downtown. Talk to Mark. They own it all.
I was going to say, maybe we can engineer a swap with PEA.
Well, part of that ultimately is.
You want a nice lot on Continental Drive?
Just for clarity, because it's just being, on the internet here. So PA does not own everything. And
I'm sorry.
Mark owns everything. Okay.
I'm sorry. Just a joke.
Just a joke.
Thanks, Dave.
But yeah, if you guys want to start a nice manufacturing facility on Continental Drive, we could engineer a swap somehow, maybe. So yeah, I guess. Well, let me just to tie this up then. What do we do about when and what do we do for determining all the site and building options? Is that going to be, that's not going to be tonight, but should it, at the next meeting, is that what we focus on, and who all needs to be involved in that? I mean, Dave's done a lot of the legwork already.
Yeah, I think it would be actually just a quick conversation, as part of our agenda. We could just go through and look at some different options. I know Dave's already gone through a lot of this, so part of this would be is just if there's anything else that we can think of, whether it's Continental Drive or whether it's, if you take 2 ends of the town, do you go, is anything over by Holland Way? What other things are available if you're trying to compare apples to apples type thing? Almost like, just do a what if.
Yeah, that was an option I was going to throw out. I didn't put it in my memo, but it was worth throwing out is the east, west, north, south. And I did look at that. I mean, it would be Holland. If you're doing the east, west, it'd be like Holland Way and out, we do own a parcel, Crossroad Landfill, but north, south, we'd have to buy both parcels. East, west, we might own one and have to buy one. So we'll have that discussion when that comes up. I did have a couple other options that I was going to throw out, but I didn't put them in my memo.
All right, so does that sound worthwhile to discuss at the next meeting? That'll probably be one of our first items. Does that sound good?
Sounds good.
Yeah, I think we have to come to grips with that fairly soon. So yes, that's fine.
Okay. And does that work okay, Dave, with your plans? And okay.
It would be helpful, obviously, to have Judy's or the budget committee's financial debt service analysis and all of that, sooner rather than later. Especially if, as Judy quotes from it, the rest of us haven't had the benefit of seeing it to sort of understand the full picture.
Yeah, Bob has been meeting with Melissa and the finance department to get updated figures and make sure his analysis is correct. What I was writing was just preliminary figures, and we're hoping to have it based on a median house rather than the $275,000 house.
Mm. We appreciate that. Thank you, Judy. Yeah, I mean, we do need this. It would be good to get that number so we can start the process of having a target budget number for this. And then based on what Dave finds for the square footage and what the average per square foot construction costs are running in the state for public safety complexes, we can start to get a barometer if we're in the ballpark or not.
I will communicate that to Bob right away.
Great, thank you. So one other thing on the facility options on number 3. So existing conditions evaluation. I'm assuming, Dave, we have the plans for the existing building. DPW probably has all the information on the systems and such. I was thinking depending on if we're going to reuse that facility, do we need a structural evaluation of it? Because if we're going to make plans to be there another 30 to 50 years, does it make sense during this feasibility study to have some sort of structural analysis on the existing building?
Yeah.
How old
I would
is it
say
now?
yes.
1970s, I think it was built.
Oh, okay.
77.
Yeah, because I'd hate to put a lot of emphasis on reusing it if it's going to need a lot of structural renovation, which it may or may not. I don't know. Just food for thought at this phase. So, and that would be something I think the consultant, the designer, would have a structural engineer on their consulting team, and they could have them do that. And it wouldn't be invasive, like we wouldn't be taking down walls or anything. I guess we'd have to determine how fruitful it would be without any kind of making holes in the building to look at the structure.
So are you saying, Chris, that you think you'd need that regardless of the option chosen if one or more of the police and fire are going to stay in that building and it's going to be, say, minimally renovated under an option? Would you think we need to do that in that circumstance?
I would say yes, just because then if we're setting it up, we want to use it for another 30 years. So is it capable of handling that? I guess I'd want to make sure.
Part of that would be is as soon as you start to renovate that building, you've got to bring it up to code. And if the building doesn't meet current structural codes, then the reality is that it doesn't. You'd have to do a lot of work, remedial work, to get it to meet those requirements. So,
yeah, I guess.
Plus, in addition to that, I didn't get the impression that, and I could be completely wrong, I mean, minimal renovations obviously is in the eye of the beholder. But I got the impression from our talks with both chiefs, and both chiefs, please correct me, that if we were going to renovate the building for either department, it was probably going to be pretty ambitious, a restructuring renovation, whatever the word is. And so I think that to not knowing the extent of renovation we need, I think we definitely have to have the information about the structural, so that we can make that judgment as to whether or not renovating is even worth it. Because, I mean, CPMS obviously gave us three options, right? Renovate it for the fire department or the police department, then build another one elsewhere, and then build a new one. But again, I think the renovations thing is really driven as well by the structural conditions.
In addition
And
to
therefore,
that,
whether or not that's really a good option.
yeah, in addition, Peter, there might, we'll probably need to update plumbing and electrical and mechanical in the building as well. So
Oh, yeah.
I don't think there's no such thing as a minimal renovation, I don't think, especially since the report made clear that the facility was very deficient as it is. So I don't think we'll be able to do like a minimal renovation to something that we've already considered very deficient.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's why the evaluation is so important, so that they can go through on each of the systems, including structural, looking at accessibility, looking at all those items and I also think that part of what we should be looking at is its energy consumption. When you look at this building and do an evaluation, you may find out that this has minimal amount of insulation, its operating costs, the facility itself doesn't meet current standards.
Yeah, so I guess I would just say, Dave, that this could be an area for negotiation with the designer. This, I'm going to guess that one of our options will be the reuse of that building, one of our top three options. So we might need them to do a little more evaluation on it than we would like to pay for, but we'll see what we can work in.
Yeah, I guess the extent of the renovations are going to be dependent on the option.
Yeah.
I mean, because you could argue that, the police could maybe take over the whole building and it wouldn't be, it wouldn't be nearly as much renovation if you had to, renovate it for the fire and apparatus and so forth. And you're getting into the apparatus bays and et cetera, et cetera. So I guess it depends. It depends on which option.
Yeah, that's true. And then I don't know about New Hampshire, but in Mass, there's minor and major renovations and they trigger different code requirements too. So like to Rob's point, you could really get into having to overhaul a lot to make it code compliant, depending on the amount of renovation, whether that's by square foot or by cost versus the value of the building. I'm not sure how that works in New Hampshire.
Let me ask you a question though. Sorry, Rob, go ahead.
It's whether it's New Hampshire or Massachusetts, it's all the same. It's all basically it's IBC based. And
Okay.
if you spend over 20% of the cost of the system, then you need to bring it all to current code. So the reality is you can't avoid doing some of that stuff. I just want to talk about one other thing too, is that we talk about what is one of the goals of the project is that do we want to talk about how long we want this facility to last? How long we're designing it for? And is that a criteria that we want to put out there to say to everybody that we're actually challenging them to design a facility that'll take us into 2060, 2050? It's a 20-year building? Is it a 30-year building? Is it a 10-year building? That's part of the criteria we need to establish.
Yeah, I think that's a good point.
Well, we do pretty good at making our buildings last at least 50 years, whether they want to or not. And I think Judy would also agree that, at least 30, 50 would be more of a target. We can't go back to the town with our hands out every 20 years looking for a new safety complex.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's right. But I as we are going to face with the department, the DPW garage, when they come up and ask for this extravagant proposal to, build a facility or a campus for the next 50 years, no one's really going to know how you do public works in the next 50 years beyond the 25-year of that point. So while the bricks and mortar of a building may last for 40 or 50 years, how the buildings are used might change pretty dramatically based on technology and operational lessons learned, you name it, about the state of firefighting or police department operations. So I think that as we think about the building, we can define what makes reasonable sense to in terms of it standing there and being viable as a building. But we have to recognize that if we ask somebody to design a building for the fire department of the future, well, it's going to be pretty hard to guess what that might be beyond 25 years. So the building has to have some adaptability built into it so that it can adapt to the changes of firefighting or police department operations in the future beyond what we know now. But building the building itself for 30, 40, 50 years, I don't think that's unreasonable. The question, it really depends on, I guess, you guys, architects and engineers, know better than I do, how much you want to pay for what kind of bricks and mortar, and what's reasonable, and what's the lifetime of it. And I defer to you guys on that judgment. But I don't think anybody should be fooling themselves that even if we build this building that could last 50 years, it's not the last time we're going to have to spend money on it between now and then to continue to keep it viable operationally.
Very true.
I think this is a good one to tie into the sustainability committee too, right? I mean, this gets into your sustainability and carbon footprint and that sort of thing. But I think it's a really good point though, Rob, as far as the town should establish that, because there's a price difference between all these options, right? There's a price difference between a 20-year building and a 50-year building for sure. And so that's a really good point to highlight up front, and so the town community knows that. Dave, I wonder if there's any guidance from the state or anything like that we could reference that they recommend that, a new building, a new town facility should follow these design guidelines or anything like that? Is there anything?
I don't know.
Which I know the federal government is really good about what they establish as what your design goals or requirements are, especially on the energy side and what those expectations are. So I don't know if you've heard anything, if the state of New Hampshire's come out with anything or anything like that.
And we may want to, if we can't do it by finding some kind of local or state standards, we may have to do that by the comparison analysis when Dave goes through these other facilities and looks at these other facilities or talks to people about these other facilities and other places, new ones and the almost new ones. He can ask them how they spec'd out the structural versus operational longevity of a building. For example, Scarborough is just building a new one. It's about to open up, I think. So they allegedly spec'd it for 40 years of lifespan and accommodating growth and public safety needs over the next 25 years. In Wells, they're gonna try to figure out how big a building they're going to build, or they know how big a building they're going to build.
Well, Wells is already done.
What?
Wells is already done.
Yeah. So it's already done, but it's not clear, how they spec what, the building structurally versus operationally. So maybe, talking to them about that might be helpful. Mm-hmm. Talking to Plastow and Somersworth might be helpful.
Yeah, and I think
recognizing each.
So why I was bringing that point up too is it really helps to evaluate the existing building and the reuse of the existing building. Is it gives a timeline for that to kind of have a benchmark. So
This is really mind-boggling, though, isn't it, Rob? I have to admire your architects to envision, 40, 50 years ahead at this time in life when so many things are and will be changing. It's quite a feat of imagination.
Well, like they say all the time, it's location, 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 right?
Wow.
All right, any other comments on number 3, or we can move on to number 4, the last one? Okay, so this is the final output. So the feasibility study, which the designer would do, I was envisioning they would develop concepts for 3 different options, and how we get to those 3 would be a result of our discussions with them in the previous step. It could be a combination of site availability or cost or anything thereof. So
Are we, the CPMS study was pretty clear that they thought there were only 3 options. They didn't specific cite the options or talk about location or anything of that sort. But generically, are the options, are we going to talk about options that go beyond renovate, the current structure for fire and then build a police, or renovate the current structure for police and build a new fire or build a new combined facility? I mean, are we talking beyond those particular, or not even particular, rather generic options?
if you would like to, by all means, we will. I plan to, yes.
Oh, okay, because I don't know what those additional options would be. I know where I have ideas about, planting it here or planting it there and site-specific stuff. But as far as the conceptual options, don't they do go beyond just the ones in the CPMS study?
Yeah, I mean, like if you think about it, we have 2 sites that we've talked about today, Continental Drive and downtown. So you could talk about all 3 building options on each of those 2 sites. So there's 6 options right there to evaluate.
Okay, I see. All right, well, you were talking site-specific option. Okay, got it.
Yeah, and then anything else. Yeah, at this point, the feasibility study narrows it down to, okay, we're going to put this combination of buildings on this site.
I also think some of the studies are going to be very, very quick. They're going to be, and what Dave has talked about is ultimately is that what will fit on what site, right? So the reality is that if there's 2 sites available downtown, guess what? And you can't fit the entire thing on downtown, then you really have to sit there and say, if the criteria is that the fire department wants to be downtown, then that begins to tell us a lot. So I think that's the level of investigation. I think that what we're asking them for is the comparisons don't have to be incredibly in-depth. They have to be a test fit of square footage to lot size, right? And make sure they fall within the proximity that has been identified through the 2 different studies.
Agreed. Yeah, so I would expect the designer to develop those 3 options. And like you say, Rob, when we go together, before we even have a designer, in our next meeting when we discuss site and building options, we'll be able to vet. And Dave has already done this. We'll just be catching up to him to a point where we'll be able to quickly vet and discard some options pretty easily, I think. So yeah, I agree with you. I don't think when we get to the designer phase and what we give to them, I don't think it's going to be a ton of options. Maybe it is only. Maybe it's 4 or 5. We'll see. And Peter, yeah, we're open. I mean, at the next meeting when we discuss this, we're open to anything at this phase.
Okay.
May I just chime in on an RFQ suggestion here?
Sure.
I would, it's probably for the last one, but there might be some value in I like the 2 public forums after the options, but there might be a benefit to have a public forum at stage 3 to get the input on options from the public.
Yeah, no, that's a good point.
It might be, it's not a lot. It doesn't add a lot to it, but.
No, that's good though. It starts to build awareness and people can comment on, it'll give you a good direction right away if a site is kind of viable or not. Like if there's a lot of local resistance to something that, that could very much influence what we decide. I guess that's another thing, Dave, too. Like when I don't know how much as we get into these 3 options and work our way to the preferred option, we'll probably have to do, if there's a site that, they'll have to talk to the neighbors, canvass the neighbors and abutters to make sure that, at least to make them aware that this could potentially be a site for a police or fire station.
Yeah, if there's a site.
Dave, you would suggest.
Sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, you would suggest moving the first public forum into the facilities option number 3, and then just have another public forum after the.
No, I would stick with the 2 in the phase 4 because you want to present the preferred option, and then you want to go back and present the preferred alternative. In my mind, so I was suggested going from 2 public forums to 3.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and I like it. I like the idea of it at stage 3, just to give people an idea of where these might be landing.
Yeah, I agree.
No surprises.
What's the designer's role in the public forums? Because, as it's written, obviously the town sets up and conducts them. But if we go back to the master plan paradigm, we had the master plan architects, shaping the discussion or leading the discussion or a fair amount of the public forum. So what's the designer's role in the public forums? Is there any?
No, I envision them doing a lot of the presenting for sure.
Okay.
And then,
Facilitators, Peter, they would facilitate.
Yeah.
If you were going to do an option selection, so similar to what they did is if you wanted to do a sticky note, here's option 1, here's option 2, 3, here's the grid of the pros and cons of each of those, and then the public could go up and potentially and vote on which one they think is the most popular or the one that they like the most.
Yeah, and I'm not saying I'm not smart enough to say that's exactly the way we should do it. I just think then that suggests that in this scope outline that whenever we talk about having a public forum, we make a point of saying that the designer facilitates that so that the designer doesn't think it's just the town doing it and conducting it. I want the designer to know that he or she's on the hook.
Yeah,
to be active in those.
Yeah, I think they'd know that, and the town, like Dave or Melissa or somebody, would start the meeting, just introduce them, and then the architects would do the presentations, and then questions with follow-up questions, or maybe, if the town had any other information to impart, the town and the architect could field questions at the end of that.
Right, but since everything has a cost, I don't want to give the designer an opportunity to say, oh, that's an add-on. So in other words, it's part of the baseline scope of what we're doing here.
Yeah.
I think we need to lay it out so that they lay into their thinking and their costing the fact that they're on the hook.
Okay, yeah, I'll add to the scope just to make sure that's clear, but it's pretty well understood in the industry, Peter, but it never hurts to specify.
I think this might be the issue. Chris, the stuff on the right box is just for for discussion. That's not going to end up in the RFQ, only the stuff on the left. So when it says town, I see where you might be coming from, Peter. You're reading town to set up and conduct. Well, that's not going to be in there. But if you look to the left, it says review options with town departments, review with residents in public forum, refine and go to second public forum. So I think it's clear on the left, not on the right, but we're not using the right.
Correct.
You're right. You're absolutely right. Thank you.
All right. Does anyone else have any other comments on the final feasibility study? One thing I would add. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Peter.
Do we therefore, as a follow-on to what David just said, everything in the left-hand column is a deliverable? Is that right?
It's the scope list. It's the work that we will ask the designer to do.
Okay, then do we have to spell out somewhere the deliverables?
Yeah, the very final item, Peter, it says the issue final feasibility study with preferred option to the town, including cost estimates. And also the very first step in step 4 is develop concepts for 3 options. That's where I say, come up with building area, site area, building massing and the number of stories, plus the narratives, minimal plans and a 3D massing model for presentation. So that's all.
And if that's fully understood as the deliverables, that's fine.
Okay. I understand it, but I can't guarantee anybody else would.
No, but I'm going to assume that people in your business who are likely to bid on this understand that.
If you look at the RFP or the RFQ that Dave's got there, their deliverables are outlined a little differently. They're a little more specific on what the site plan, building plans, overall concept renderings, design narratives by construction division, independent cost estimate, sustainability analysis. So I think that listing to me is more what you're talking about, Peter, as far as a deliverable.
Okay, that's fine, because I have some comments on that'll address some of this, so that's fine. If that's what you view as the deliverables, that's fine.
Yeah.
Because I don't have any issues with anything that's in there, but I do have some suggestions to elaborate.
Okay. Yeah, we could insert that back in there too, Rob.
Well, I think they kind of go together in some ways, because one's really more of a scope of kind of like scope of work, and the other one's a deliverable.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, one thing
They ought to match.
Oh.
Shouldn't they?
Say what?
They ought to match. At a minimum, they ought to match, right? Or whichever one is separate shouldn't be viewed as precluding the work that we think is a deliverable in the other.
I guess.
Dave went through. And correct me if I'm wrong, Dave. You basically took the outline that we had before and put that into the RFQ, while you didn't have the benefit of the discussion that we had just today with the new outline, if you will, of the scope.
Correct. That's all I did. I could have just left it blank, but all I did was a quick cut and paste job and then reference it in my memo that I just did it. It didn't, I wasn't.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
That's all it was.
And I'm not criticizing you. I'm just saying that's the difference.
Understood.
So we have to take the left-hand column and stick that into the RFQ.
Right.
Right. For RFP.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then you could either get rid of the deliverables and they're understood in the list, or you could revise the list and pull out the deliverables and set them down the bottom like you had did originally. So
yeah, either way, right.
All right. The last thing I'll note, we don't have much time left here, is, and Dave, I don't know if you guys have done this before. We'll have I was thinking the town, we can set up a project website on the town website. And then we can post information there as we get it and want to post it publicly. and then solicit. You could get email comments from that, and then you could post questions that you received with answers from the town to that sort of thing. Does that sound okay? Oh, you're on mute.
Yeah, I think the public safety, I think both the chiefs maintain a Facebook page. That could be a website page. That could be a good place. Is that okay, chiefs? Is that something within your bandwidth? Because I wouldn't be able to maintain the website.
Yeah, we like DBW keeps an ongoing page on their website of updated projects, and we can just put a link from each of the fire and the police departments to one unified project page. I think, between all of us, we can certainly do that.
I'm the wrong person to ask to do that. So.
It's not hard. We got it. We can do it.
Yeah,
I just thought the town website, because Bob can do that stuff in his sleep. So,
Chris, can I follow up on that a little bit? It's a little different topic than this document.
Yep, absolutely.
So just an idea as far as the website and others. I think it's going to be important that the town somehow with this, the town talks about the need to do this work, right? The public safety complex. It goes through the warrant articles. It's other things, but we got to get the word has to get out. And I think two chiefs probably can do a really good job at this, so that this isn't a surprise. And I don't want to say a sales pitch because that's not the right word, but there needs to be put out there that why that building is in such bad shape, and pictures and videos and any of that stuff. So I want to, when you guys were talking about the website, it just triggered that thought again. So
pictures as much as we can allow in terms of a police department, and we don't want to give away too many interior shots of that.
Yeah, no, that's true. I just want to make sure that, it was when we did the tour, it was pretty clear that it needs to change. And so I don't know. I don't have any suggestions other than that's going to help the public get a better understanding of this project and support it.
Agreed.
We can, as part of the page we're talking about, do sort of an existing conditions, but I do agree the pictures are going to have to be very specifically chosen, if any, and maybe do it more in a narrative, section by section or something like that. But we can work with the chiefs and get something. But I think what you're saying essentially is you want to educate the public on what they currently have and why there's a need. Is that what I'm understanding, Mark?
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe it's through social media somehow. And it's just something that is so people can. A lot of people are just going to focus on the dollar signs, but it's important to just communicate up front that there is a justified need. So, or at least try to.
I concur wholeheartedly. And the other thing I would add is make sure there's, and I don't know who this would fall to, but a contact who can receive comments and questions from the public, like a conduit. And I don't know who that would be, but make sure it's very evident that people can supply feedback. And I think it's important for us to occasionally post questions and comments with our answers to them, just to let people know that, yes, we heard what you said, and this is how we're addressing it. Now, I don't know who that would be. I know Dave and Melissa probably aren't jumping in.
I'm not sure who it will be, but we will look into it and get back to you, though.
Yeah, it could just be an email address sent to somebody. All right, so we only have a few minutes left. I think that wraps it up. So
I think Dave was looking to talk.
Oh, yes. Yeah, go ahead, Dave.
Maybe to that end, maybe you're going to say this, Chris. Sorry, just like where are we at with the RFQ? We're going to give it a little more time. Are you good with that? So I can take it and insert it. And is it good to issue over the next few weeks, or do you want to wait till the next meeting to finalize it and everyone say, okay, this is the exact language, go ahead?
Dave, if we mark up what we see on the one that you sent us and send it back to you, is that something we can communicate back and forth with you on that, not break the RSA rules?
You can, yeah, you can, but are you talking about the scope? Because we're going to just cut and paste this into that. Do you mean you have comments about like the background or the intro or something to that effect?
Yeah, just a couple of comments, like the age of the building. That was,
Oh yeah, great. Yeah, no, that's fine. Yeah, you can send that to me and I can incorporate it. I just want the committee to decide whether we're going to, go ahead and issue it under the parameters or that we've talked about tonight, or we should wait and hold off for like a final draft to come to the next meeting before it issues. Because you do, you meet first and third, so you're not meeting in 2 weeks. I think this is one of those ones that you'll be meeting in about 3 weeks.
Thank heavens.
Dave.
Dave, I didn't have any issues with the RFQ. It was pretty generic. And I guess my only question is, do you put in minimum qualifications for a firm, such as 3 PSC complex projects completed in the last 7 years or anything like that?
We generally don't. I mean, we target, qualify. I know, several firms that are very qualified to do just this and this is what they do. So I don't usually, but we can reject and accept any proposals we want. So I don't usually, but I'm happy to take suggestions.
No, I mean, I was thinking the same thing. You probably don't need to, because you will generate. I know just a few firms in the state too that could do a project like this. So I know you'll generate qualified designers. I just didn't know if that was part of our RFQ language or not.
Well, it's in the criteria. It's like when we evaluate and we have our interview panel, which I'm sure there'll be a representative from this committee, or that's what I would like, is on the interview panel doing the evaluation. That is part. You get points for the experience of similar projects. So. Kind of the cream rises to the top during that process with the evaluation, so it comes into play, but it's not directly a minimum qualification in the RFP.
Yeah. So I think what I would say, Dave, is I'll send you the finalized scope here, the left column. I would be happy with you issuing it, but if we're not in a rush and you want to just put together the final draft, we can bless it at the next meeting or not. I guess, in my opinion, it would be up to you, and I'm open to other comments from the rest of the committee on that.
Let me suggest that Dave puts the revised scope that we just talked about this meeting into the RFP or RFQ, whatever it's going to be, and then he sends it out again to us, and that if we have questions about it, is it permissible to call him and say, hey, why'd you use this word? Or do we need to put this in? Or we can, if he sends us the electrons, we can track, make suggestions on track changes and send them back to him. I don't have a lot, but I've got some that are not, I'd like to think, unuseful. And I do have some technical questions about some of the language in here, but I don't want to waste anybody else's time.
Yeah. I make a motion that we send our comments in and we do a final draft and vote on them next time.
Okay, I'll second that. And how do you vote, Peter?
Aye.
Aye. Rob?
Aye.
Mark?
I just want to, can I just pause? Because I want to type what that motion was. Can you just repeat that, please?
Just that we send any of our comments back to Dave. And then any of the Chris will send back this feasibility study summary, and Dave will pull it all together and send out a final draft for us to review next time.
At the next meeting.
Well, shouldn't he first put in the revised scope, and then send that to us? That might alleviate or eliminate some of the questions.
I think I see that the revised scope to me is in front of us, but that's so. Okay, never mind. I think it would be included in the draft that he sends to us, is that we would have all of the revised scope and any language recommendations from you, Peter, and from myself, and from anybody else, and then we just go through it and review it and approve it, and it goes out.
I'll send an
Okay.
email. I'll take care of that. I'll put that in. I'll send out an email tomorrow soliciting your comments individually just to me. And then, I'll incorporate them all and have you draft for the next meeting.
Yeah, and is that okay, Dave, time-wise? I'm not.
Yeah, I'm in no rush.
Okay, sounds good.
A couple weeks isn't gonna, I don't think it's gonna make a difference here.
Okay. And with that, I think that will close the meeting. But before I move to adjourn,
So motion was approved.
oh, yes, and I voted yes on that too. So approve 4-0 to have Dave send out one final draft, and we'll all agree on it at the next meeting.
Okay.
Or once we send comments back, and then we'll bless it at the next meeting. Tomorrow, 3:30, the Rains Farm walkthrough. Hopefully you can all make it. The weather's supposed to be not so great for that, rainy and cold, so dress accordingly. I just don't want to move it because I don't want to reschedule for another time. So they're game to do it. I'm game to do it. Hopefully at least 2 of you are as well.
I can make it.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Peter, are you going to put on your galoshes and make it or what?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, good. All right. And with that, I will make a motion. Before I close, does anybody have any other comments before we adjourn? Nothing? Okay. So I'll make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Second.
Okay. Peter, how